November 25, 1177. The air in the Levant is not just hot. It is heavy, suffocating, and choking on the dust of 10,000 hoofbeats. Picture the scene. The sun beats down on the Judean hills with a malice that boils the water in canteens and heats chainmail until it burns the skin. In the distance, a massive dark cloud stains the horizon, moving like a slow, inevitable plague toward the holy city. This is not a storm. It is the army of Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, the greatest military mind of the Islamic world. 26,000 men are marching under the yellow banners of the Ayyubid dynasty, a force so large it stretches for miles, confident, relaxed, and utterly assured of victory. Against them stands a kingdom on the brink of collapse, led by a boy who cannot even hold a sword with his right hand. King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem is 16 years old. He is dying. Leprosy is eating his nervous system alive, deadening his limbs and rotting his flesh beneath his royal robes. He rides at the head of a pitifully small force, barely 500 knights and a few thousand infantry riding, toward what every military advisor has told him is certain suicide. But here is what the chronicles often fail to capture about that afternoon. It was not just a clash of armies. It was a collision of hubris and desperation. Saladin believed the kingdom of Jerusalem was already a corpse waiting to be buried. He did not realize that the dying boy on the horse was about to teach him the most painful lesson of his life, that a king's power does not reside in his muscles, but in his will. To understand the miracle of Montgisard, we must first understand the catastrophe that preceded it. By late 1177, the geopolitical noose around the Crusader states was tightening. Saladin had spent years uniting the fractured Islamic world, welding Egypt and Syria into a single, terrifying hammer poised to smash the Latin East. The strategic situation for the Crusaders was a nightmare. The bulk of the kingdom's army, along with its most capable commanders, had marched north to besiege Hama in Syria, distracted by a campaign that left the southern border exposed. The gate to Jerusalem was wide open, and the only thing standing in the way was a leper teenager and a skeleton crew of defenders. Saladin, a master of intelligence, knew this. He received word that the Franks were out of position, and he moved with the speed of a desert predator. Crossing the Sinai from Egypt, he bypassed the border fortress of Gaza, ignoring the Templar garrison stationed there. His eyes were fixed on a bigger prize. He aimed to sack Ashkelon, capture the king, and then march straight into Jerusalem before the Christian army in the north could even turn around. The crisis deepened when Baldwin, hearing of the invasion, rushed south to Ashkelon with every man he could scrape together. It was a brave move, but it seemed like a fatal error. Saladin's vast army simply swarmed around the city, effectively trapping Baldwin inside. The king of Jerusalem was now a prisoner in his own fortress, cut off from his capital, while the Sultan's main force marched on, burning the countryside as they went. It was here that Saladin made the critical mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He looked at the walls of Ashkelon and decided that the boy king inside was irrelevant. In Saladin's mind, Baldwin was a cripple leading a ghost army, too weak to sally out and too few to pose a threat to the rear of the Ayyubid column. Confident that the war was practically won, Saladin allowed his discipline to fracture. He let his army spread out. Like a river bursting its banks, the Saracen forces dispersed across the plains of Ramla and Lydda to pillage. They were foraging for food, sacking villages, and loading their horses with loot, believing there was no enemy left in the field to punish them. The Ayyubid baggage train became sluggish, weighed down by stolen cattle and plunder. The soldiers doffed their heavy armor to cope with the heat, their weapons stowed away as they marched casually toward Jerusalem. Saladin was no longer commanding an army in battle formation. He was leading a massive, disjointed raiding party. He assumed the lion was trapped in the cage of Ashkelon. But Baldwin was not a lion. He was something far more dangerous. He was a man with nothing to lose. Inside the walls of Ashkelon, amidst the panic of his advisors, the young king made a decision that defied all military logic. He would not wait to be starved out. He issued the order to break the siege. The moment Saladin's main force drifted over the horizon, Baldwin threw open the gates. The 500 knights, accompanied by the formidable Templars under Odo of St. Amand, thundered out of Ashkelon. They didn't ride for safety. They rode north, hugging the coast, moving in a desperate, forced march to intercept the Sultan before he reached Jerusalem. This was a race against time and geography. Baldwin's small force had to outpace an enemy 50 times their size, moving through rough terrain, hoping to catch the tail of the dragon before it could turn and devour them. The pain in the king's body must have been excruciating. The friction of the saddle rubbing against numb and ulcerated flesh, yet he refused to dismount. By the afternoon of November 25th, Saladin's army was crossing a ravine near the hill of Montgisard, near the modern site of Gezer. They were completely unaware that the crippled boy was miles behind them. The Ayyubid forces were strung out in a long, vulnerable line, crossing a wadi, with their siege engines and baggage train blocking the road. Suddenly, the horizon shifted. From the northwest, emerging from the coastal haze, the banners of the Kingdom of Jerusalem appeared. The sight must have stopped the hearts of the Saracen rearguard. It was impossible. The king was supposed to be locked in Ashkelon, yet here he was, appearing like a phantom on their flank, holding the high ground. Panic rippled through the Ayyubid ranks. Saladin, realizing his catastrophic error, frantically tried to organize his troops. He shouted orders to his Mamluk guard to form lines, to bring the baggage train to a halt, to deploy the archers. But an army of 26,000 cannot turn on a dime, especially one scattered for miles and drunk on the spoils of pillage. Up on the ridge, the scene was one of spiritual fervor. Bishop Albert of Bethlehem raised the true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, a piece of the wood believed to be from the crucifixion itself. The golden casing glinted in the sun, a beacon of divine authority. King Baldwin, heavily bandaged, was helped down from his horse. In full view of his men, he fell to his knees in the dust before the cross. He prayed with such raw, weeping intensity that the chroniclers say tears streamed down his face. When he rose, the frailty was gone. He was no longer a leper. He was the wrath of God. He remounted with his good hand and signaled the charge. 500 heavy cavalry knights lowered their lances. This was the weapon that the Muslim world feared most, the Frankish charge. A solid wall of steel and muscle, accelerating downhill, gathering momentum until the ground shook like an earthquake. Behind them, the infantry roared, fueled by the terrifying sight of their dying king leading the vanguard. They hit Saladin's lines with the force of a meteor. The sound was deafening, the cracking of lances, the scream of horses, and the sickening crunch of metal on bone. The Crusaders did not stop defense. They smashed through the disorganized Ayyubid ranks like a hammer through glass. The shock was total. The Saracen light cavalry, unarmored and unprepared, evaporated on contact. They had no time to use their speed or their bows. The Templars, the special forces of the medieval world, acted as the spearhead, carving a bloody path straight toward the Sultan's yellow banner. Saladin watched in horror as his army collapsed. The Mamluks, his elite personal guard, fought bravely to buy him time, throwing themselves into the path of the Frankish knights. But the momentum was unstoppable. The Crusaders were fighting with the frenzy of men who knew this was their only chance to survive. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. The narrow wadi that the Ayyubids were crossing turned into a trap. Men were trampled by their own horses, pushed into the mud, or cut down as they tried to flee. The vast numerical advantage of the Muslims became a liability, as thousands of panicked troops clogged the escape routes, preventing reinforcements from coming up. In the center of the chaos, the king of Jerusalem rode with a fury that belied his sickness. His bandaged hands held the reins while his knights formed a protective ring of steel around him, hewing down anyone who came close. They cut through the Mamluks, getting so close to Saladin that the Sultan was nearly captured. Realizing the battle was lost, Saladin did something he had almost never done. He fled. He abandoned his baggage train, his siege engines, and his army. He climbed onto a racing camel faster than a horse over long distances and rode into the desert night, barely escaping the Templar lances nipping at his heels. The sun set on a field of carnage. The invincible army of Egypt had been shattered, but the destruction did not end with the battle. As the remnants of Saladin's forces fled back toward the Sinai, nature turned against them. A torrential freezing rain began to fall, turning the desert tracks into rivers of mud. Bedouin raiders, sensing blood, emerged from the wilderness to pick off the stragglers. Without supplies, without water, and harassed by the pursuing Christians, thousands more died on the retreat. It is estimated that Saladin returned to Egypt with only 10% of his army. He had lost his personal guard, his wealth, and his aura of invincibility. For Baldwin, the victory was absolute, but the cost was physical. The exertion hastened the deterioration of his body. He returned to Jerusalem a hero, the savior of his people, greeted by ringing bells and weeping crowds. He had achieved the impossible, defying the logic of war and the limits of human biology. The Battle of Montgisard stands as a testament to the unpredictability of history. It delayed the fall of Jerusalem for 10 years. It proved that numbers are not the only currency in war. That surprise, terrain, and the sheer psychological shock of a desperate charge can break even the mightiest empire. But beneath the tactics and the bloodshed, there is a profound human lesson here. We often look at our limitations, our sicknesses, our lack of resources, the overwhelming odds against us, and we accept defeat before the battle has even begun. Baldwin IV teaches us that the spirit is not bound by the body. He teaches us that when you are backed into a corner, when the world sees you as weak, and when the enemy dismisses you as broken, that is the moment you are most dangerous. That is the moment you charge. If you want to uncover more lost chapters of history where the impossible became reality, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. We are building a library of the past, one battle at a time. See you in the next one.